Hello Year 12s, welcome to this video, which is our third video in the series of 3 videos on stakeholders. In this video, we'll be focusing on the corporate social responsibility considerations that stakeholders take into account. Now, there are 3 things that you need to do as you watch this video. The first thing is to take the very best Cornell notes that you can. The second thing is to use the pause and rewind functions. Use the pause function where you want to stop this video so that you can take notes. Use the rewind function where you've missed out on some information and you want to go back over that information. The third thing that you need to do is to have your vocabulary sheets handy in front of you so that you can write into those vocabulary sheets the definitions of important terms and of any other words that you might not be familiar with. Once you've finished watching this video, please make sure that you read the pages of the textbook referred to on this slide. And if you find any further useful information in that reading, then supplement your Cornell notes with that information. You'll remember that there are 2 learning intentions for this topic. The first learning intention is that you should be able to describe the characteristics of stakeholders of businesses, including their interests, potential conflicts between stakeholders, and corporate social responsibility considerations. The purpose of this series of 3 videos is to assist you to achieve this first learning intention. In the first video, we focused on the characteristics of stakeholders of businesses. In the second video, we focused on the interests of stakeholders and potential conflicts between stakeholders. And in this, the final video, we focus on the corporate social responsibility considerations that stakeholders take into account. The second learning intention for this topic is that you should be able to apply these concepts to case studies. You'll be able to achieve this learning intention by completing the tasks that I give you in class. By way of a recap, remember that there are 11 different types of stakeholders for a business. Firstly, there are shareholders in the case of a company, or owners in the case of a partnership or sole trader. Secondly, in the case of a company, there are directors. Thirdly, there's the management team. Fourthly, there are employees of the business. Fifthly, there are customers of the business. Sixthly, there are the suppliers of inputs to the business. Seventhly, there are creditors of the business, that is, people who have lent money to the business, such as banks. Eighthly, there are trade unions who represent the employees in the business. Ninthly, there are competitors of the business. 10thly, there's the community in which the business operates. And 11thly, there is the government. Let's start off with a definition of corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility is a topic that we cover in more detail in Outcome 3 of Unit 3. But for the purposes of this unit, you need to have an understanding of the basics. There are 4 components or parts to the definition of corporate social responsibility. Please write this definition down in your vocabulary sheets at the end, where there's space for additional definitions. In your Cornell notes, I also want you to write down this definition of corporate social responsibility, but leave a couple of lines between each of the 4 components of the definition so that you can make additional notes about that component. Corporate social responsibility is the commitment by a business, firstly, to conduct their business in an ethical manner. That is, to conduct their business in a way that is fair. For example, a business will act ethically if the products that it produces are not likely to damage or injure customers, if it is truthful in its advertising, if it employs its employees at a fair wage, and if it provides its employees with a safe work environment. An example of a business acting unethically is the company that manufactured thalidomide. Thalidomide was used a number of years ago to alleviate morning sickness in pregnant women. But it had some very serious side effects, including that it resulted in the birth of deformed babies. Now, this company kept on selling thalidomide despite the fact that it knew that there was a very high risk that thalidomide was causing these birth defects. That's clearly acting in an unethical manner. A more recent example of businesses acting unethically are businesses which have been advertising their honey as 100% Australian, when in fact that honey included honey from overseas, or businesses that have been advertising their honey as 100% pure honey, when in fact their honey contained glucose syrup. A final example of businesses acting unethically is businesses such as Domino's Pizzas and 7-Eleven, which have consistently underpaid their employees. That is, they've paid their employees less wages than those employees were entitled to under the applicable awards and enterprise agreements. The second part of the definition of corporate social responsibility is that it's the commitment by a business to take responsibility for the economic, social and environmental consequences of their activities. For example, a photocopy paper manufacturer will demonstrate corporate social responsibility where it manufactures its photocopy paper using recycled paper, rather than simply having used paper sent to landfill, that is a tip. Such a business is taking responsibility for the environmental consequences of its activities. Similarly, a casino will demonstrate corporate social responsibility where it puts limits on the amounts that a person can gamble at the casino at any one time, or where it refuses to allow ATMs in the casino because these give gamblers ready access to all of their savings, which they might be tempted to use in their gambling. Again, such a business is taking responsibility, but this time for the social consequences of its activities. The third part to the definition of corporate social responsibility is that it's a commitment by a business to contribute to the improvement of the economy, society, and the environment. A business which acts in a socially responsible manner does more than just comply with its legal obligations. There are a number of laws that are designed to protect the economy, society, and the environment. For example, there are laws that prohibit false advertising, laws that prohibit the sale of drugs, and laws that prohibit the pollution of the environment. All businesses have to comply with these laws. However, a business that acts in a socially responsible manner will go beyond these legal requirements. For example, it's not unlawful to produce eggs from battery hens, that is, hens that are kept in a cage. However, a business that is acting in a socially responsible manner might only produce eggs using free-range hens, that is, hens that are not kept in a cage but that are free to roam around the farm, at least within certain parameters. This contributes to the improvement of society by treating animals, in this case hens, more kindly. Similarly, it's not unlawful for a clothing chain to import shoes from overseas where it can buy those shoes cheaply and sell them at a lower price than Australian-made shoes. However, a clothing chain can act in a socially responsible manner by deciding to buy and sell Australian-made shoes. This contributes to the improvement of the economy by supporting local shoe manufacturers. And finally, it's not unlawful to buy electricity from coal-fired generators. However, a business that acts in a socially responsible manner might decide to buy its electricity requirements from a wind farm. This contributes to the improvement of the environment because coal-fired generators pollute the environment by burning coal to produce electricity, whereas wind farms just use wind to generate electricity and do not pollute the environment. The final component of corporate social responsibility is that it's the commitment by a business to be accountable to a wide range of stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and the community, both now and in the future. For example, while a business is accountable to its shareholders for making a profit, a socially responsible business is one that also recognises the interests of other stakeholders. For instance, while Coles and Woolworths are such big purchasers of milk that they can demand that their milk suppliers, that is the farmers, sell their milk to them at a very low price, with the result that those supermarket chains can then on-sell that milk to their customers at a low price, it is socially responsible for those supermarket chains to recognise that milk suppliers also have an interest in being paid a fair price, and that the viability of many farming communities is dependent on the farmers being given a fair price for their milk. Similarly, businesses such as Westpac recognise that they have a responsibility to support the community. For example, the Westpac Rescue Helicopter Service is very active in rescuing swimmers and hikers who get into difficulty, and that is a community service that is provided by Westpac. Our learning intention is that you need to be able to describe corporate social responsibility considerations that are taken into account by stakeholders. As flagged in the second video, a number of stakeholders of a business do have an interest in the business acting in an ethical and socially responsible manner. That is, a number of stakeholders of a business do take into account corporate social responsibility, or CSR, considerations. I'd like you to draw this table up in your summary books. You can see that it's a 3-column table. In the left-hand column, I have listed the different stakeholder groups that have an interest in the business acting in an ethical and socially responsible manner. In the second column, I want you to describe the ways in which these different stakeholder groups take into account CSR considerations. And in the last column, I want you to briefly describe an example of how each of these stakeholder groups takes into account CSR considerations. I'm now going to give you the information that you need to complete this table. Starting off with shareholders and other business owners, they take into account the corporate social responsibility of a business when deciding whether to invest in the business. So there's some information that you'll fill in the middle column of your table. For example, some superannuation funds have a policy of not investing in companies that obtain revenue from alcohol, weapons, gambling, pornography, tobacco, or uranium. So there's an example that you can fill in the third column of your table. I think you're getting the drift of it by now. Turning now to directors, management, and employees. These are all stakeholders that take into account the corporate social responsibility of a business in deciding whether to apply to work at or to continue to work for the business. For example, the results of a survey conducted by the Nielsen Group in 2016 showed that 67% of employees considered corporate social responsibility to be a very important factor in choosing an employer. In addition, corporate social responsibility impacts on the corporate culture of a business. For example, a business that supports the community by donating money to charity, by giving its employees time off to volunteer, for instance, in a homeless person's shelter, or by organising a toy drive to collect toys for underprivileged kids at Christmas time, that business is fostering a corporate culture that values the reputation of the business in the community as an active contributor to the community. Customers are another group of stakeholders that take into account the corporate social responsibility of a business. In the case of customers, they take into account the corporate social responsibility of a business in deciding whether to buy goods and services of the business. For example, Lush has a policy of not testing its cosmetics and bath products on animals and of only buying the inputs it uses from suppliers that are not involved in animal testing. Customers who don't support the use of animal testing will therefore prefer to buy Lush products rather than cosmetics from other cosmetics producers who do use animal testing. Suppliers and creditors take into account the corporate social responsibility of a business in deciding whether to supply inputs to the business. Now, you'll notice that I have grouped suppliers and creditors together, and that's because creditors do supply an input to the business, which is they supply loans to the business. So, for example, between 2015 and 2016, the ANZ and the Commonwealth Bank halved their lending to projects in the carbon-intensive sector, that is, projects such as coal mines and coal-fired electricity generation plants. These banks did this because of concerns about the contribution of carbon-intensive projects to global warming. The next and final stakeholder that takes into account corporate social responsibility considerations is the community. In this case, the reputation of a business in the community depends on the business demonstrating a high level of corporate social responsibility. For example, there have recently been quite large community demonstrations against the construction by Adani, which is an Indian company, of the proposed Carmichael coal mine in Queensland. This mine would be Australia's largest coal mine, and the coal would be shipped from 2 ports close to the Great Barrier Reef. The community is very concerned that dredging to deepen the ports for the coal ships will cause environmental damage to the reef and harm tourism. So this is an example of a corporate social responsibility consideration that the community has taken into account in relation to a business, in this case Adani. Well, this brings us to the end of this video on corporate social responsibility considerations, and also to the end of the 3 videos on stakeholders. You should now be able to describe the characteristics of stakeholders of businesses, including their interests, potential conflicts between stakeholders, and corporate social responsibility considerations. As for the second learning intention, this requires you to be able to apply these concepts to case studies, and you'll be able to achieve this learning intention by completing the tasks that I give you in class. Remember, you now need to read those pages of the textbook referred to on the first slide, and if you find any useful information from that reading, then please supplement your Cornell notes with that information. Thank you for your attention.